My name is Paulina Peters, and this presentation serves the purpose of examining the ethical issue of whether governments should adopt gender quotas for board of directors membership. In order to analyze this question, the focus will first lie on the facts surrounding gender quotas, as well as on the actors affected thereby and their respective interests. The main part of this presentation will then be the application of three ethical theories to the issue, those being the feminist, the ethics of rights, and the ethics of justice theory. On the basis of their application, a decision will then be made and tested as to which of these theories best reflects the interests of all actors involved. In the concluding part, my colleague will then reflect upon the application of these ethical theories. Still today, women only make up a small proportion of the members of companies' board of directors, and are, as this statistic shows, globally underrepresented in these positions. Gender quotas aim at remedying this trend and at increasing the female representation in these positions by way of a statutory obligation for companies to hire women as members of their board of directors. A governmental intervention of this kind would have an impact on various actors who each have different interests. The first main group of actors affected by gender quotas are women. It can be assumed that these have an interest in being given the same employment opportunities as men, and thereby in having increased chances of employment in board positions. In contrast thereto, it can be assumed that men have an interest in governments refraining from the adoption of gender quotas in order for them to maintain the same chances of employment as they would have without the existing of such quotas. Thirdly, it can be assumed that companies as actors have an interest in maintaining the established hiring traditions, which generally prefer men for board positions, in order for them to avoid any form of disturbances in the company's processes that may be caused by female representation. The final actors are then the states themselves. These may have an interest in providing its citizens with equal treatment and equal opportunities, and in having a good reputation amongst other countries by way of showcasing their respect for these principles. Having established these points, my colleagues will now continue with the application of the feminist theory.
I'll be discussing feminist theory. Much of the origins of contemporary feminist theory derive from the central notion of a female ethic. However, it is the manifestation of inequality, injustice, and oppression in society, particularly with regards to gender, which has driven much of the feminist movement towards the promotion of core democratic values, the elimination of inequality, and seeking to bridge social divides. At its heart, feminist theory promotes equality along the lines of certain female virtues, such as consideration of one's differences, relationships, the practice of care, the avoidance of harm, and mutual recognition. Now, feminist theory has developed along different strands of influence over the centuries, and the first of which that I would like to touch on was developed by Mary Wollstonecraft, and she argued that the enforcement of a need for women to aspire to certain forms of femininity and virtues such as selflessness by the male-dominated society undermined one's strength and dignity as a human being, and she advocated that rather women should be free to pursue goals outside of family and marriage, and she should be independent of the shackles of subordination associated with such, because what one considers a virtue should be the same for both men and women. Now, Wollstonecraft draws on a certain connotation with equality, which one would find nowadays in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and she seeks to establish a level of equal footing for women in society, and draws upon almost an inherent right to equal opportunity, and seeks to very much reduce the influence of male-dominated behavior in fields which she aligns with violence and destruction, which is detrimental to humanity. Now, many feminists actually accept the notion that there are specific female virtues, despite the opposition of Wollstonecraft, such as Mary Daly. And now Mary Daly believes that there are between men and women in their argumentation of moral issues, that they have fundamental differences, and that is a result of women naturally being less aggressive and more nurturing and cooperative than men. Now, Daly advocates that such virtues shouldn't be considered a deficiency, which it has been in a patriarchal society, but rather there is a need to recognize that such virtues facilitate the promotion of equality and the deconstruction of oppression in the betterment of society. Now, an additional feminist who follows this kind of line of argumentation is Carol Gilligan, and she argues that the difference between this level of argumentation between men and women is a result of women's consideration of their consequences and impact of their behavior on relationships, and then their ambition to seek the avoidance of the infliction of pain. And she advocates that feminist theory is really a rejection of the prioritization of traditional and principled reasoning, and rather that there is a need to consider emotions, and there is very much an importance attached to the notion of care and the promotion of feminist virtues to enforce a greater fairness in society. Now I'll pass the floor to my colleague.
My name is Lisa Udding, and I will follow up upon my colleague's introduction of the feminist theory and how this applies to the current question before us, whether governments should introduce gender quotas for boards of directors. From a feminist perspective, the introduction of gender quotas is a double-edged blade due to the different strands of feminist ethics. On the one hand, introduction of quotas based purely on gender undermines the concept of intersectionality, in which providing greater opportunities for equality for just one demographic while neglecting the needs of other demographics based on class, race, age, and others. An example of this is when a woman wearing a hijab applies for a position in the board of directors. A gender-based measure will allow her to have a greater opportunity to be accepted because she is a woman, but it does not affect the prejudice she faces based on her expression of religion, often found in many societies. Thus, such a single-issue approach only marginally impacts the opportunity of this individual. On the other hand, the introduction of such quotas could provide women as a demographic with a wider base of influence in different boards of directors. This could lead to the establishment of gradually developing change, where the ethics of care are taken into account when considering new members for the board of directors. Such ethics of care can lead to the inclusion of possible candidates not based on their gender or them being part of other disenfranchised groups in society, but on their skills, providing greater equality for all and doing away with the need for quotas overall. This means that in essence, enacting quotas goes against the thoughts behind feminist ethics. However, such a measure could be used as a stepping stone for greater equality and greater influence of the ethics of care, as well as a gradual shift towards a world that puts a greater priority on values such as cooperation and inclusion, as opposed to individuality. Thus, based on this information, the introduction of gender quotas by the government would provide a positive outcome for women and possibly resulting in an eventual lack of need for such a measure overall. For now, my colleague will continue with an approach from an ethics of rights perspective.
My name is Tatiana Lajus and I will introduce the theory of ethics of rights. Locke's right ethics is one of the four major ethical theories that has shaped today's society. According to Locke, every person has a set of fundamental rights that they are entitled to simply by existing. It is Locke's thought that these fundamental rights are not to be infringed upon in any way by any other person, action, or choice. Locke states that there are three essential rights for every human being, such as the right to life, liberty, and property. The right to life means that everybody is entitled to live. Right to liberty means that everyone is entitled to do anything they want to, so long as it does not conflict with the first right. Right to property means that everyone is entitled to own all the things they create or gain through gift or trade, so long as it does not conflict with the first two rights. Locke emphasizes that these natural rights are not simply a claim to a right, but he suggests that by simply being human, we have certain inalienable rights that are hence pre-political. In contemporary theory, these and other moral claims have come to be referred to as universal human rights and form the basis for establishing and/or evaluating ethical standards within the social order. There is somewhat of a gray area in which an essential right and a want, desire overlap. For example, one could argue that they are entitled not to work in the rain due to the danger presented. Whether this is an essential right that protects the safety and well-being of that person, or just a desire of that person to not work in an uncomfortable position, is up for the debate. It is often up to the law to decide which rights are essential or not. My colleague will further introduce this theory more in depth.
Good afternoon. My name is Natalia Sabova, and in my part of this presentation, I'm going to talk about ethics of rights theory, and I'm going to apply this theory on a question of whether or not the government should adopt gender-based quotas for a membership for a position in a board of directors. As my colleague mentioned in the previous part, the ultimate moral value of the ethics of rights theory is equality. According to the theory, everyone is equal and everyone has the same rights and opportunities. When we apply the ethics of rights theory on the previous mentioned question, the result is that the government should not apply gender-based quotas. So, in a society where everyone is equal and has equal opportunities, the quota will immediately the quota will immediately limit these opportunities. So when we have, for example, set quota of 30% and 70%, so 30% of women, for example, and 70% of men, then there is immediately a limitation imposed on how many people can apply according to this percentage for a certain position. So quotas are therefore against the principle of equal opportunity for all, since it is highly possible that one gender will be given preference over the other, and since the certain percentage is set, as I mentioned before, there is immediately lack of the equal opportunities. So the fundamental moral principle behind it is that the government, by not applying gender-based quotas, will provide substantially equal opportunities for everyone. So where there are no quotas limiting the percentage of people working in a certain position, everyone has the same opportunities to obtain the position, and therefore everyone is equal in their rights and obligations. According to the ethics of rights, an individual action is moral when the individual performs his moral duties or obligations with the right intentions. So, in general, it is the intentions of an individual that determine whether a certain action is or it is not moral. According to the rights theory, an action is good because it's right. The rights approach therefore takes it takes in consideration duties and obligations, but doesn't look at the consequences. In particular, the individual's behavior will determine whether an action is moral or not. An individual is entitled to take any action as they want, as long as it doesn't violate the rights of others. Therefore, an action that the individual action is good because it's right according to his or her duties. The individual, therefore, can, if they want to, they can apply for a certain position as long as they don't violate the rights of others. However, at the same time, the government cannot set quotas because then the position is limited by the quota and it will not result in equal opportunities for everyone. So the purpose that ethics of rights serve in this situation is attaining equality between everyone and providing equal access for everyone to higher positions, such as position in the board of directors. And everyone is entitled to this position. In conclusion, in the situation as we have now, where the issue is of adoption of gender-based quotas for board of director membership, as it was analyzed by the ethics of rights theory, it is safe to say that it is immoral to adopt gender-based quotas, as it will not result in a society where everyone is equal, and the ultimate moral value as is set by the rights theory is not achieved. Thank you very much for your attention.
My name is Nuvola Gagliani, and I'm going to introduce you to the ethics of justice theory of Rawls. First of all, I'm going to explain the basis of the theory. The theory recognizes justice as fairness. Rawls attempts to explain his theory by creating a fictitious situation in which there is an original position. This original position would ask what terms would free and equal individuals agree with under fair conditions. So if there was complete fairness, what terms and rules within society would these free and equal individuals agree on? The second requirement would be the veil of ignorance. This deprives the individuals of knowledge irrelevant to the principles of justice. This is, for instance, the race, gender, age, or income of the individuals. In this situation, no person would try to agree on more favorable terms for the group it is part of, since this fact would be unknown. Justice would thus be achieved when rights are distributed fairly among these individuals, which, according to Rawls, could happen in a situation like this. In this case, the original position would be that historically women have been discouraged or banned to apply within boards of directors. The strong discrimination against women led to an overrepresentation of men in the field. So the original position in this case would be unfair. The gender quota in this scenario would be a measure that would correct the original position and address the systemic underrepresentation of women within the field. In application of the normative ethical structure, we would ask a question. What is the ultimate good or moral value according to Rawls? According to Rawls, an action would be good if it would be fair or just. Therefore, the adoption of gender quotas would be a good action because it would contribute to the fair distribution or fair access for all groups to the boards of directors, men and women. What is the fundamental moral principle would be the second question to ask. Act as a good government would to achieve justice. This is according to Rawls. A good government would adopt gender quotas since the adoption redistributes rights fairly, allowing women to be encouraged to apply to jobs from which they were banned or discouraged to apply for a long time in order to bring about justice. Third question to ask would be, what in general determines that an action is moral? Good governments would generally adopt measures that aiming at a fair distribution of rights of all individuals. So, if the original position was that there was a fair distribution of rights of all individuals, then the quota would not be a measure of a good government. If we imagine the original position to be the current one, meaning that there is no fair distribution of rights, then the quota would be a corrective measure that a good government would take in order to bring about a fair distribution of rights.
In particular, in regard to the given question of the adoption of gender quotas, a moral action must remedy the original position, that being the underrepresentation of women in order to achieve the fair distribution of rights. Precisely, a governmental action would therefore be moral if it enhances the equal access of women and men to board of directors positions. The example of Germany here shows that with the adoption of gender quotas, this desired fair distribution of rights can be achieved. Following its adoption in 2015, the female representation in corporate boards have been increased by 9.1% in 2018 and has thus been proven to be successful. In a given case, ethics thus serves the purpose of achieving equality between women and men in the workplace. Following this assessment, and in light of the ethics of justice theory, it is therefore right and moral for governments to adopt gender quotas.
We examined the three available options: ethics of feminist theory, ethics of rights, and ethics of justice theory. Ethics of feminist theory addresses primarily the thought behind why gender quotas are needed. Gender quotas definitely enhance the position of women in the world. Plus, it is a measure to achieve equality between men and women. This theory best addresses the question whether governments should adopt gender quotas for board of directors memberships, since its goal is to ameliorate the position of oppressed groups and particularly that of women.
As was already discussed during this presentation, the aim of gender quotas is to achieve diversity in the primarily male-dominated board of directors, and in addition to respond to continuous underrepresentation of women at workplaces. That is why we as a group believe that governments should adopt gender quotas for board of directors membership to diversify the boards. How can the decision be implemented with the greatest care and attention to the concerns of all stakeholders? As was discussed on the previous slides, our decision can be best justified under the feminist ethics theory, as this approach not only takes into account the interest of women, but also strives to achieve equality between men and women, meaning this approach takes great care and attention to the concerns of all stakeholders, including companies and states. Women have been long underrepresented minority on high posts in companies' decision-making processes, resulting in male-oriented company policies that fail to consider women. The decision we suggest protects the minorities, i.e. women, and will further take into account the principles of equality and non-discrimination in further activities of the companies. What have we learned from this specific situation? We have learned that this approach has already been widely implemented in various countries across the world. Such examples can be found in Norway, Spain, Iceland, Germany. And it has also been known that it has been a successful trend in diversifying companies' representation in boards of directors, while promoting equal opportunities for all the stakeholders. Thank you for your attention. This is the end of our presentation.